There really is nothing more zen than a beautiful ride on a horse who is attentive and responsive and yet calm and safe. But sometimes achieving that can be challenging, especially when you are riding a young off the track. While a lot goes into determining a horse's energy level and behaviour, nutrition is certainly one of the major players. The amount of energy, the type of energy, the way ingredients affect the gut microbes, and the diet's nutrient balance are the main aspects of nutrition that will have an impact on behaviour. Let's look at these aspects of your off-the-tracks diet, starting with the big one, the amount of energy. If there is only one thing you remember about feeding and behaviour, it is this: don't feed too much energy. Horses, and particularly off the tracks, are sensitive to the amount of energy, or calories, in case this is more familiar terminology for you, in their diet. The more energy there is in their diet, the more energy your off the track will express in their behaviour. And over the years, I have found this to be the most common contributing factor to hyperactivity in horses while being ridden. Too much feed simply equals too much energy. The solution? Feed less. The best way to do this? Be very conscious of how much hard feed you are feeding. Hard feeds, be they grain or fibre-based, are typically high energy ingredients. So if you overfeed them, you can very quickly oversupply energy in the diet and create hyperactive, unsafe behaviour in your off the track. So don't feed too much. How do you know how much is too much? Let your horse tell you. Whenever you feel that uptick in behaviour, when it goes from good, forward, responsive energy to too much energy, and more like a wound up rubber band when under saddle, you're probably feeding too much for the amount of work your off the track is doing. When you realise you're feeding too much, it is as simple as feeding less and continuing to reduce the amount you are feeding until you find the sweet spot for your horse. Or, if your off the track has got themselves into a right tiz, cut the hard feed out completely for a short while. And once their behaviour comes back down to where you want it, slowly introduce their hard feed again. And increase it gradually until you find their sweet spot. Keep in mind that sweet spot of just the right amount of feed will change, depending on how much energy they are using doing the work you are asking them to do. So be mindful of workload. Don't overestimate how hard they are working, which will then cause you to overfeed them. And don't be afraid to adjust their amount of hard feed regularly, daily if you have to. So the amount you feed matches the work they do on any one day. Details on how to do this can be found in the Queensland Off the Track video, Off the Track Nutrition into the Future. You do need to be mindful if you're feeding a complete feed that you don't accidentally cause nutrient deficiencies by simply reducing the quantity you feed. I'll cover how to avoid doing this in a few minutes. Next though, let's explore how the type of energy can affect behaviour. Horses evolved for 55 million years eating a high fibre diet that contained very little grain. Fibre is their most natural source of energy, and it tends to be the source of energy that has the least impact on behaviour. Which means if you can get away with feeding your off the track on predominantly pasture and hay, and they maintain weight and muscle well on a predominantly forage-based high fibre diet, then you should absolutely do that. There is no rule to say that off the tracks need hard feed. Now don't get me wrong, you can definitely get changes in behaviour in off the tracks if they are grazing high energy rocket fuel like pasture, so do be conscious of that. And limit access to these pastures if they create behavioural issues for you. If you have an off-the-track who can't maintain weight or muscle on your pasture and hay for at least some of the year due to the quality of the forage you have available, or the amount of work they're doing, then you'll probably need to use a hard feed. If you happen to have an off-the-track who loves to show you how much energy they have in those springy little hooves of theirs, then you need to choose carefully, as some hard feeds do tend to affect behaviour more than others. I would rank hard feeds in order of least likely to most likely to affect behaviour, like this. At the coolest end of the spectrum, we have fibre and oil-based feeds. These are typically grain-free feeds based on high-energy fibres like sugar beet pulp and lupin hulls, as well as oils. Oil by itself also makes an excellent cool source of energy. Then there is the low-starch feeds. These are low-grain feeds with less than 20% starch. Then extruded grain feeds. While extruded feeds are high in energy, of the grain feeds, they have the least impact on the hindgut and therefore the least impact on behaviour. We will talk a lot more about this in a minute. You do, however, have to be careful not to overfeed extruded grains. Because they are so digestible, they are also high in energy, which means it's easy to feed too much and affect behaviour the way we have just discussed. Next on the scale is other grain feeds processed using methods like micronizing, pelleting or steam flaking. While more digestible than raw grains, they're not quite as digestible as extruded grains. So they have the potential to have more of an impact on the hindgut and more of an impact on behaviour. They are also high in energy and can quickly impact behaviour if overfed. And on the hottest end of the scale, we have raw grains. Grains like corn and barley in their raw state contain huge amounts of starch that is poorly digested in the small intestine. If you feed hard feed that contains raw grain, most of the starch ends up in the hindgut, where it ferments rapidly and shifts the hindgut from being predominantly the good fibre fermenting microbes to being dominated by the bad starch fermenters. And this has negative implications on behaviour for multiple reasons, which gives us a beautiful segue into the next element of feeding that can affect behaviour. And that is the way feeds can affect your off-the-tracks hindgut microbes. Remember the trillions of microbes that live in your horse's hindgut? They do all sorts of important stuff for your horse, with two important functions being the production of B vitamins and communication with your horse via the gut-brain axis being closely linked to behaviour. The B group vitamins are well known for being a part of nervous system function and behaviour control in mammals. While feeds and forages contain B vitamins, horses are also heavily reliant on the fibre fermenting microbes in their hindgut to produce B vitamins for them. To maximise B vitamin production, we need to maintain a strong and healthy population of fibre fermenting microbes. To do this, feed lots of forage. Forage-based diets support the fibre fermenting critters and maximise their ability to make B vitamins for your horse. And don't feed too much grain and never feed raw grains. Too much grain or raw grains dump a heap of starch into the hindgut and shift microbial balance towards the undesirable starch fermenting microbes, reducing B vitamin production in the process. Plus, these undesirable starch fermenters actually actively destroy vitamin B1. And any time you reduce B vitamin production or destroy it, behaviour can be affected. Then there is the gut-brain axis, which for me is one of the most mind-blowing and in many ways scary aspects of nutrition. We know from research in multiple animal species, including humans, that the microbes that live in the gut communicate with their animal host to not only affect but control behaviour. Research, like the recent study that shows how microbes from stress-resilient mice are able to promote recovery from stress-induced depression and cognitive decline in previously stressed mice, highlight how much an animal's microbiota are entwined with behaviour. And it absolutely pays to remember this when thinking about how to feed you off the track for calm behaviour. There are 3 things you can do to make sure you are supporting the microbes who produce the hormones and send the messages to your off-the-tracks brain to help them stay calm. Feed lots of forage. It's the fibre fermenting microbes that keep your horse nice and zen. So, by feeding lots of forage, you give these calm little critters lots of their favourite food to keep their populations strong and healthy. And they then dominate the gut-brain axis communication with your horse. As a quick reminder, lots of forage for an average size off the track is either free access to pasture or between 10 and 15 kilograms of hay per day. Feed a variety of fibre. Fibre variety gives rise to microbe diversity. And this gives your off-the-track the best chance of having a hindgut microbe population, most like the one they evolved to have in their hindgut. And that gives them the best chance of having normal communication between their gut and their brain. Feed controlled amounts of grain and never feed raw grains. Too much grain, or raw grain, as already mentioned, will cause large amounts of starch to end up in the hindgut where it ferments. This starch fermentation then shifts the microbe population towards the starch fermenting microbes. And these less than desirable critters are associated with more anxious behaviour in horses, which is exactly what we are trying to avoid, especially in off the tracks. If you haven't already, go back and watch the Queensland Off the Track videos, Knowing Your Horse Inside Out and the first 12 months, to learn more about the gut microbes and how to feed your off the track to keep their microbe populations strong, diverse and healthy, and their behaviour calm. And finally, remember that nutrient balance can affect behaviour. The B vitamins, as we've already touched on, and minerals like magnesium are important for normal nervous system function and behaviour. So be sure to use a high quality balancer pellet or vitamin and mineral supplement, or complete feed at the correct feeding rate to keep your off the tracks diet balanced. I spoke earlier about reducing your hard feed to control behaviour. Here is a quick reminder to be mindful of keeping your horse's diet balanced if you do reduce your hard feed. Pay attention to the feeding recommendations given on the back of feed bags. These are the amount of feed needed to meet vitamin and mineral requirements. If you find the feed you are using has a feeding rate that is too high for your horse from an energy perspective, and you are consistently feeding below recommended feeding rates, you should switch to a feed with a lower recommended feeding rate. For example, if you find your off-the-track sweet spot is 2 kilograms of hard feed per day when they're in moderate work, this feed has a feeding rate that is too high. You need a minimum of 2.5 kilograms per day of this feed for a 500 kilogram horse in moderate work to meet their vitamin and mineral requirements. Instead, you would be better using this feed, which has a feeding rate of 2 to 2.5 kilograms per day for a 500 kilogram horse in moderate work. So it will meet all of your off-the-tracks nutrient requirements when fed at 2 kilograms per day. Also, use the feeding rate tables to regularly adjust your off-the-tracks daily feed amount according to their workload to help you maintain calm behaviour. This feed, for example, allows you to feed 1 kilogram per day on days off when there's no work, 1.5 kilograms per day on days you do light work, and 2 kilograms per day on moderate work days. by switching between these amounts depending on your horse's daily workload. You will be controlling the amount of energy in your horse's diet and always maintaining a balanced diet in the process. And this will do wonders when it comes to your horse's behaviour. There really are many more aspects to behaviour we could talk about. We just don't have time. But I can't talk about feeding for behaviour without mentioning this critically important tip. Feed loosen hay before you ride. Truly making sure your horse's stomach is full and comfortable for every ride will make a huge difference to their behaviour. Go back and watch the Queensland Off the Track videos, Off the Track Nutrition into the Future and Managing Gastric Ulcers for more details. To recap the most important bits about feeding for behaviour, remember, don't feed too much energy. If your horse isn't as calm as you would like, reduce their hard feed until you find the sweet spot where your horse has got just the right amount of energy. Be mindful that some feed ingredients affect behaviour more than others. Forages, fibres and oils are least likely to affect behaviour, while raw grains are most likely to cause hyperactive behaviour and should be avoided. Your off-the-track's gut microbes impact behaviour through their communication with your horse via the gut-brain axis. Feeding forage-based, high-fibre diets, a big variety of forage and fibres, and feeding grain in controlled amounts will help to keep the calming microbes dominant in the gut. Feeding a balanced diet is important for calm behaviour, so pay close attention to the correct feeding rate for the products you are using. Feed loosen hay before you ride to keep your off-the-track stomach pain-free and your horse happy and calm during your rides. Feeding to create a happy, calm and safe off-the-track is better for you and it's better for your off-the-track. And by following the feeding and nutrition tips from this video is also completely achievable. Have fun and be sure to enjoy those zen rides.